Scream is what we're talking about. Or is it Scream 5?
No, it's just Scream. So this is going down the David Gordon Green Halloween route of, rather than saying Halloween or Scream, you just say Halloween or Scream. And because it's self-referential, there's a thing, but requel, reboot and sequel.
Please.
The story, essentially, and at the beginning of the screening that I saw, which I think was one of the first screenings, there was a thing which was the voice of, do you like scary movies, came on and said, one of the things that we don't want anyone to do is to provide any plot spoilers at all. So I'll be very cautious, although people will have seen the press and all that stuff. Basically, we're back in Woodsboro. The Ghostface killings are starting anew, beginning with a sequence that knowingly rehashes the Drew Barrymore opener of the original Scream. The Stab franchise, which is Scream's film within a film, it's the kind of it's drawing on the. If Scream is real, the Stab is the fictionalized version of what's happening in Scream. That's in the previous. It's in the previous installments. Has run dry, but now there's a sort of new resurgence of this thing. The scene is set for cocktail of metatextual gags and knowing nods interspersed with a bunch of slayings that will bring together original cast members and fresh new blood. Enough said in terms of giving stuff away. So the film is directed by Matt Bettelini-Olpin and Tyler Gillett, who previously collaborated with Guy Busick on the black comedy horror Ready or Not, which you may remember me reviewing, which was about someone who goes to a posh house where at midnight they play a game of hide and seek, but it's a deadly game of hide and seek. And I kind of compared it to Brian Usner's Society, but I said, unlike Society, it's much more of a kind of an overt comedy, although it did a very good job of, that film did a very good job of kind of balancing the comedy and the yucks. In the case of this, what you have is, because it's it's a reinvention, reimagining, restart, but also sequel of the Scream movies, of which there were 4 and now this one, is that the kind of the self-referential gags are updated. So at the beginning, somebody gets asked, what's your favourite scary movie? And they say The Babadook, because it says a lot about motherhood and I'm not really interested in slasher films. And there's jokes about elevated horror, which is this term that, I completely hate, as does anybody, elevated horror as opposed to horror. You go, no, it's not elevated horror, it's just horror.
It's like alt country.
Yeah, exactly.
No, you just mean country.
Exactly. It was previously known. It's like alt-right, or as it was previously called.
Right.
Yeah. And yet so wrong. And then there's the sort of the usual concoction of that, and then the sort of stabby gore that you get in the Scream movies. What you don't get is you don't get any of the visceral fear from the film. People forget this. I mean, I remember when the first Scream came out, and I did an on stage with Wes Craven. We were talking about this. The beginning of the original Scream, I know that people are kind of really used to it because very quickly, when the first Scream came out, very, very quickly, the studio did Scary Movie. The same studio did Scary Movie. And I remember I asked Craven about it, and he said, yeah, this town moves really fast. So you do Scream, which is a kind of postmodern, self-referential slasher that kind of deconstructs the slasher genre. And then immediately somebody does a spoof of it. And you go, it's like doing a spoof of a... What's the point of that? So this has a sequence at the beginning that refers very much back to the original opening sequence of Scream, which was really scary. The first Scream opening thing was really scary. And I remember talking to Wes Craven and saying, what I love about the film is it's got that joy of having an audience scared, because one of the things that we all kind of lost after the great slasher cycle that kind of was kicked off by Halloween and then was Friday the 13th, which sort of brought grindhouse slasher movies into the mainstream. And then you suddenly had this whole bunch of quite interesting films when, it's like a carnival ride. You'd go along and it was, big shrieky stuff. I remember seeing Friday the 13th and being properly scared first time round. And Scream had that, but it also had these knowing self-referential jokes about, in a horror movie, you wouldn't do that. And anyone who's in a horror movie says, I'll be back in a minute, they won't be back in a minute. And you never do this and you never do that, all that stuff. So it was a real cocktail. And I said to Craven, what I love about it is how much fun the being scared is. And he said, that's the whole thing that people don't see. They don't see horror movies as celebratory, but they are. But in order for them to be that, they have to be scary. Scream 5, the new Scream, isn't scary. Nor is it original, because we've kind of been down this route a number of times. Now, that's not to say it's not without merit. Certainly the screening that I was in, People laughed at some of the gags. There's gags about fan culture, which are quite funny. And there was a lot of sort of knowing nods and people just enjoying the fact that the Scream franchise was back. But what you didn't have was any of that fierce originality of the original. You certainly didn't have any of the tension or the scares of the original, despite the fact that there's 18-rated, gore and that kind of thing in it. And what it really reminded me of was, looking back to Wes Craven's New Nightmare again, and I was referring to this before. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is the film that began all of this. And, if you loved Scream, and the sequels I thought, okay, fine, but not really. If you loved Scream and you want to see more of that, you'd be better off going back to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which kind of got swept under the thing. And look at how much that movie now looks like a really influential film. As far as the new Scream is concerned, I suppose the thing it has in its favour is there will be a generation of people who never saw Craven's work in the cinema. You interviewed Craven, didn't you?
Wes Craven for that movie?
For Scream?
No, for Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Of course you did. I'm so sorry.
A Radio 1 interview.
Wow. Okay, well, you have a fantastic history of having interviewed filmmakers about interesting movies, because New Nightmare, I think, really stands up now. And there is a generation of people who didn't see Craven's work in the cinema. For somebody of my generation who did and remembers the thrill of Scream and remembers the poster, which was, calling to mind Argento, and remembers just how brilliantly of its time that film was. Scream 5 is, it's all right. It actually, I think the Halloween reboot was more surprising in the way in which it reconfigured it to make it into Jamie Lee Curtis's post-traumatic nightmare. I think this will do well. I think it'll prove to be a crowd pleaser. I gave me very little to scream about.